The stale air of the office always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and unspoken anxieties. Mine was the third cubicle on the left, a small, meticulously organized island in the sea of identical gray partitions. At 32, I was supposed to be further along. Years of careful planning, late nights, and a relentless focus on detail had put me on a solid trajectory at the software development firm here in Columbus, Ohio. I was Sila's and I believed in process, in logic, in predictable outcomes. Life, I was learning, had a cruel sense of humor about such beliefs. My daily rhythm was a comfortable, predictable cycle. The early commute avoiding the worst of high street traffic, the quiet satisfaction of code compiling correctly, the low hum of servers. I was perhaps a little jaded by the corporate machine, the endless meetings, the performative enthusiasm of some colleagues, but I found solace in the elegant precision of my work. I built systems, complex structures of logic and data, and I built them to last. My reputation was quiet but solid, reliable, thorough, and deeply knowledgeable. Then came Chloe. She arrived like a brightly colored bird in a flock of pigeons, all fluttering energy and distracting noise. Officially, she was a project manager assigned to some of the same critical development tracks I was leading. Unofficially, she was a master of avoiding work. I'd see her at her desk, tucked away in her corner office, the telltale glow of her screen reflecting off her face. It wasn't project timelines or technical documents lighting up her features, it was the distinct, pixelated patterns of Solitaire. Or I'd walk past her door, slightly ajar, only to hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of someone deeply asleep. Naps, full-on in-office naps. At first it was just irritating. Her lack of contribution meant extra load for the rest of the team, including me. My meticulously planned schedules started to slip, not because of my work, but because dependencies she was supposed to manage weren't being met. I'd send polite emails, gentle reminders. They went unanswered or were met with breezy excuses about being slammed or in back-to-back meetings. My jadedness deepened. I'd seen incompetence before, but rarely coupled with such blatant disregard for the job. Things escalated subtly at first. Key pieces of information I needed from her would be misplaced. Approvals would be delayed for days, sometimes a week. My projects, which were on track to be major successes for the company and significant boosts to my career, began to lose momentum. It wasn't just annoying anymore, it was impacting my performance metrics. My meticulous planning was being undermined by someone who couldn't be bothered to stay awake. The real trouble started with the incident. It wasn't a grand, dramatic act, but something insidious, like a slow-acting poison. A critical server configuration file was corrupted. Not just a simple error, but something deliberately altered. A few key lines of code scrambled just enough to cause maximum disruption without an obvious source. It happened on a night when Chloe was the last one in the office, supposedly finishing up some urgent tasks. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for our shared projects. Systems went down, data feeds froze, progress ground to a halt. The panic in the office was palpable. Management, including my boss, Mr. Henderson, descended into a flurry of damage control. Fingers were pointed. Questions were asked. Because I was a lead on the affected projects and the file-involved configuration I sometimes worked with, I was automatically under scrutiny. Silas, walk me through your recent access logs for the server, Mr. Henderson asked, his voice tight with stress, his eyes scanning the chaotic situation unfolding on screens around us. I provided everything, confident in my innocence. My meticulous records showed nothing out of the ordinary, no late-night logins, no suspicious activity. But the questions kept coming. Had I shared my credentials? Had I left my station unlocked? Was there any possibility at all, that a change I'd made, perhaps in haste, could have caused this? The implication hung heavy in the air. My perfect record, my reputation for being precise and reliable, was suddenly being questioned. The chaos that Chloe's supposed late-night work had coincided with was now reflecting poorly on me. I wasn't the target of the sabotage, not directly, but I was definitely an unwitting casualty. My projects were stalled indefinitely while the damage was assessed and repaired. The forward momentum of my career, which I had built so carefully, had slammed into a brick wall. Over the next few weeks, the company scrambled to fix the damage from the server incident. The official line was cause undetermined, but the whispers lingered. And during this period of intense pressure and recovery, Chloe's behavior didn't change. The napping in Solitaire continued, seemingly oblivious to the crisis she was somehow connected to. She'd bat her eyes, look stressed when anyone mentioned the incident, but offer no real help, no insight, just continued avoidance. My projects remained in limbo, tangled in the bureaucracy of the post-incident investigation. The deadlines I was supposed to meet came and went. Clients were unhappy. Internal reviews flagged my projects as at risk. The performance metrics that had once been a source of quiet pride were now a stark reminder of how quickly things had fallen apart. My direct contributions were overshadowed by the lingering shadow of the server chaos. I was getting unwarranted scrutiny because I was a lead on the projects affected by the disruption, and because the origin of the disruption was never definitively pinned on the actual culprit, whoever that was. The air around me changed. Colleagues who used to seek my input now seemed hesitant. My reputation was tarnished, not by anything I had done, but by the proximity to a disaster I was caught in. The jadedness I'd felt before was nothing compared to the bitter, corrosive feeling that now settled in my gut. I had worked so hard, been so careful, and for what? To have it all jeopardized by someone else's actions or perhaps inaction and subsequent manipulation. It felt profoundly unfair. My career trajectory wasn't just impacted, it felt like it had been derailed. All the effort I'd poured into building a future was crumbling because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time when chaos struck. The injustice of it festered. I watched Chloe continue her charade, sipping her coffee, playing her digital cards, utterly untouched by the wreckage she had at best contributed to the cause of. And I, the one who had tried to keep things on track, the one whose projects were now stalled and whose reputation was under a cloud, was paying the price. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just about a server file anymore, it was about everything I had worked for being undermined by laziness and deceit. The feeling of being an unwitting casualty solidified into a hard, cold knot of resolve. Something had to change. I couldn't let her get away with this, not when I was suffering so deeply because of her negligence and the chaos it spawned. The thought of revenge, initially a flicker of dark fantasy, began to take root, nourished by the fertile ground of my ruined prospects and growing despair. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The stories I used to think were just entertainment suddenly felt like blueprints, echoing the burning need for balance, for consequences that was consuming me. Act 1 was over. My ordinary life was shattered. And I was just beginning to understand the price of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The descent into Act 2 wasn't a sudden plunge, but a gradual slipping away from the person I thought I was. My initial attempts to fix the situation were based on my old habits: logic, clear communication, providing evidence. I tried explaining the impact of Chloe's delays to Mr. Henderson, showing him how her missed deadlines directly correlated with the stalling of my projects. I pointed out the suspicious timing of her late night and the server incident. My meticulous nature meant I had timestamps, email chains, project management software logs, a mountain of data that to me painted a clear picture. But the picture I saw wasn't the one Mr. Henderson wanted to see or perhaps was capable of seeing. He was overwhelmed with the fallout from the server issue itself. The company was bleeding money trying to recover. Pointing fingers at a project manager for laziness, while valid in normal times, seemed trivial to him compared to tracking down sophisticated sabotage. He'd nod, sigh, tell me he appreciated my diligence, but then pivot back to disaster recovery. "Silas, I understand your frustration with the project delays," he'd say, rubbing his temples. "But right now we need all hands on deck focused on restoring stability. We can address workflow issues once we're out of the woods. Just try to be a team player, all right. Less focus on blame, more on solutions." Solutions? How could I find solutions when the fundamental problem, Chloe's lack of accountability and potential role in the chaos, wasn't even being acknowledged? It felt like trying to build a house while someone was constantly kicking out the foundation stones. My attempts to highlight the connection between her behavior and the ongoing chaos only made me seem difficult, negative, unable to adapt. The unwarranted scrutiny intensified. Instead of being seen as a victim of circumstances, I was starting to be seen as a problem employee, fixated on trivialities while the company was in crisis. My reputation, which had been merely tarnished, was now actively being dismantled. Colleagues avoided eye contact. The collaborative atmosphere I thrived in evaporated, replaced by cautious distance. Lunchroom conversations would hush when I approached. I felt isolated, unjustly accused by circumstance, and utterly alone in my struggle. My meticulously built career, the one I had envisioned ascending steadily, was not just stalled, it was actively being reversed. The projects I led were eventually reassigned, deemed too critical to remain under the purview of someone whose performance was now being formally questioned. Being stripped of my projects felt like a physical blow. These weren't just tasks, they were the culmination of months of my life, my expertise, my dedication. To see them handed over to someone else while I was sidelined felt like a profound betrayal. My motivation, which had been about regaining lost ground, sharpened into something darker, a burning need to make the person responsible for this feel a fraction of the pain I was experiencing. The financial strain added another layer of stress. My bonus for the year was tied to project success, and with my key projects reassigned, that was gone. The prospect of promotion, which had felt like a certainty, vanished. I started getting performance improvement plans, vague documents citing lack of team cohesion and difficulty adapting to fluid situations. Fluid situation? It was a deliberate mess created by someone else. Reading those corporate speak condemnations felt like being suffocated. Each bullet point was a lie, a distortion of reality, and I was powerless to correct it. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My meticulous mind, unable to solve the complex technical problems it was trained for, instead began to churn endlessly on the injustice of it all. I'd lie awake, replaying conversations, dissecting Chloe's dismissive shrugs, Mr. Henderson's weary sighs. The jadedness turned to cynicism so deep it tasted like ash. I no longer saw colleagues, I saw potential betrayers, people who would step over you to protect themselves. Resourcefulness, one of my key traits, was twisted from a tool for problem-solving into a means of survival, then into a weapon. I started using my technical skills not to build but to investigate discreetly. I looked for patterns in Chloe's network activity, trying to find definitive proof of her involvement in the original server incident, or at least evidence of her constant slacking. I found plenty of evidence of the latter: hours logged where no work was done, network traffic showing constant connections to gaming sites, but nothing concrete enough to definitively link her to the sabotage that had started everything. It was maddening. She was an expert at leaving just enough ambiguity. My rock bottom arrived quietly, not with a shout but with a formal meeting notification. Mr. Henderson and HR. The air in the small conference room was thick with unspoken judgment. They didn't fire me, not outright. That would have potentially involved messy unemployment claims and questions. Instead, they offered me a transition opportunity. A role in a different department, something lower profile, less technical, a significant step down with a corresponding pay cut. It was a corporate demotion disguised as a compassionate off-ramp. Accept it or resign. The message was clear: I was being pushed out, my career at this company effectively ended, all because I was caught in the crossfire of a situation I didn't create and couldn't control. The unwitting casualty had become the primary victim. Walking out of that meeting, the sterile office lights seemed to mock me. My chest felt hollow, my hands trembled. Everything I had worked for, the respect I had earned, the future I had envisioned was gone, replaced by a stark, humiliating reality. Chloe's naps and solitaire games, combined with whatever chaos she had initiated or been involved in, had cost me everything. The injustice was no longer something I could bear. It was a wound that refused to heal, a poison that had spread through my entire professional life. My jadedness curdled into a potent, burning rage. My meticulousness, once applied to code, now saw only vulnerabilities in others. My resourcefulness, once used for innovation, was now calculating vectors of attack. There was nothing left to lose. They had taken my career, my reputation, my sense of security. The only thing left was to make someone pay, to reclaim a sense of power, a sense of justice, even if it was a dark, twisted version of it. The idea of revenge, once a fleeting thought, now filled the emptiness inside me. It was the only thing that felt real, the only path forward. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Stories of people pushed too far, of equilibrium restored by force. I understood them now intimately. I was one of them. My transformation was complete. Act 2 had ended in ruin. Act 3 would be built on retribution. Emerging from the wreckage of my career wasn't a graceful ascent, it was a furious clawing upwards. The demotion felt like a brand, but it also brought a perverse kind of freedom. I was no longer invested in the company's success, only in my own survival and the settling of a debt. My meticulous nature, no longer tethered to project deadlines, became focused, obsessive. I spent hours analyzing the situation, not just emotionally but strategically. Chloe was the key. Her laziness, her deceit, her ability to manipulate the system, these were her weaknesses. And they were the tools I would use against her. My research into her online habits intensified. While I never found definitive proof of her involvement in the initial server sabotage, that lingering mystery remained, a testament to her slipperiness or perhaps just sheer luck on her part. I found endless proof of her malfeasance in the aftermath. Her continued solitaire playing, her deliberate hiding of the computer crashes from Mr. Henderson, framing them as technical issues unrelated to her actions. This was the specific injustice that had prolonged the chaos, diverted resources, and ultimately led to my downfall. This was where I would strike. My plan was simple in concept but required meticulous execution. It revolved around the one constant in Chloe's day: solitaire. She was addicted to it, a creature of habit. I would weaponize that habit. I needed access to her machine just for a moment. This is where Maria came in. Maria was a developer on a different team, someone I'd collaborated with occasionally before everything went south. She was sharp, discreet, and had a healthy skepticism about corporate bureaucracy. I hadn't shared the full extent of my plan with her, not at first, just that I needed help with a personal project involving a coworker's computer. She was hesitant but curious. When I explained Chloe's constant slacking and how it had impacted the entire team, omitting the full devastating impact on my career trajectory initially, Maria's own frustrations with Chloe's reputation for doing nothing resonated. I showed her some of the low-level data I'd gathered, the network logs showing solitaire usage during work hours, the timestamps of her inactivity. Seeing the concrete evidence of Chloe's fraud swayed her. She agreed to help, provided it was non-destructive and couldn't be traced back to her. My meticulousness went into overdrive. I knew I needed to modify the actual solitaire executable file on Chloe's machine. This wasn't something you could just do remotely or with a simple script. It required physical access and a specific technical approach to remain undetected. I spent days researching, learning about executable file structures, hexadecimal editors, and how operating systems timestamp files. My resourcefulness kicked in. I found open-source hex editors, practiced modifying test files on my personal laptop at home in Columbus, ensuring I understood precisely which bytes to alter to cause a crash without leaving a calling card. The goal wasn't to permanently disable her computer, just to make the act of opening Solitaire cause an immediate, undeniable system failure. The plan was, Maria, whose desk was closer to Chloe's office, would distract her, maybe ask a convoluted question about a project, something requiring her full attention away from her computer. In that window, I would slip into Chloe's office. I needed a physical copy of the Solitaire executable. I couldn't just copy it from my machine. That would have the wrong file date and time. It had to look like the existing file had somehow become corrupted in situ. My resourcefulness found a workaround. I used a small bootable USB drive loaded with a minimal operating system and the hex editor. Booting from the USB would allow me to access her hard drive directly, bypassing Windows and any security software running within it. I could then locate the Solitaire exe file, make the minuscule, precise alteration in the hex code, and crucially use command line tools on the USB system to reset the file's modification and access timestamps back to their original values. This last step was critical. It would make the modified file appear as though it had been corrupted years ago, when Windows was first installed, not just minutes before. The day we chose was a Tuesday, typically quiet. My hands were steady, a testament to my focused determination, but my heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't like debugging code. The consequences of failure were significant, not just getting caught but failing to achieve the justice I craved. Maria initiated her distraction. I saw Chloe leave her office, drawn into a conversation near the water cooler. This was it. I walked calmly to Chloe's office, slipped inside, and closed the door quietly. Her computer was on, logged in. I inserted the small USB drive, rebooted her machine, and selected the option to boot from the USB. The minimal OS loaded quickly. Navigating the file system felt familiar, like a complex maze I was designed to solve. Finding Solitaire exe took moments. I opened it in the hex editor, scrolled to the section I'd identified during my practice runs, and carefully, precisely, blanked out a small string of hexadecimal characters. Just enough to break the program's execution loop, not enough to corrupt the file beyond recognition or trigger overt system warnings. Then the crucial timestamp reset. I used the command I'd rehearsed countless times, touch AMT SS path / solitaire, exe, replacing the variables with the original creation date and time of the file pulled from its properties before I modified it. It looked perfect. The file size was identical, the dates matched everything else in the Windows directory. I ejected the USB, rebooted her machine back into Windows, and closed the door, returning to my desk just as Maria finished her conversation with Chloe. Chloe returned to her office oblivious. The suspense was a physical weight. Would she open Solitaire? When my heart pounded, I watched her office door, the light from her monitor visible through the glass. 10 minutes passed, 20. Then I saw her settle in her chair, a slight smile playing on her lips, the look of someone about to escape into their digital world. Her hand went to the mouse. A click, immediately her smile vanished, her eyes widened, she tapped the mouse again, nothing, then her screen flickered and went black, a moment of silence followed by the whirring sound of her computer rebooting. Success, she tried again after the computer restarted. Same result, crash, reboot, crash. Mr. Henderson soon arrived, alerted by the unusual activity. I watched from a distance as Chloe explained with feigned confusion that her computer was suddenly crashing for no reason. She didn't mention Solitaire, not once, just suddenly crashing. Mr. Henderson, already burnt out from the earlier server chaos, was exasperated. He spent the next few hours trying to diagnose the issue. He checked system logs, ran diagnostics, scratched his head. Chloe maintained her innocent act, complaining about the faulty machine hindering her work. The irony was exquisite. The very chaos she had thrived in, the technical issues she had used as a shield for her laziness and potentially worse, was now being used against her, amplified by her own habitual behavior. Chloe, frustrated by the constant crashes and unable to get her Solitaire fix, kept trying to launch the application, convinced it was some random bug. Each attempt a perfect, traceable crash. Mr. Henderson grew increasingly puzzled. He couldn't find a pattern, a specific driver or hardware failure. But the crashes were undeniable, and they happened every single time Chloe tried to do something. What was she doing? He started watching her more closely. My revenge wasn't just the hack. It was the perfect storm of her addiction, her lies, and the existing tension from the previous incident. Her refusal to tell Mr. Henderson she was launching Solitaire every time she crashed her machine was her undoing. It made her look suspicious, like she was hiding something. Why wouldn't she mention the program she was trying to run? Her secret habit became her undoing. The crashes continued for several days. The disruption to Chloe's work became undeniable. Mr. Henderson, out of options, finally insisted on sitting with her, watching exactly what she did. He saw her open the Solitaire icon. He saw the crash. He saw her attempt to quickly close the window before it crashed again. The truth, ugly and undeniable, was revealed by her own actions, triggered by my carefully placed trap. The fallout for Chloe was swift. Confronted with irrefutable proof that her actions were causing the system instability, and that she had been deliberately lying about it, she couldn't talk her way out. The years of slacking, the missed deadlines, the general incompetence, it all came flooding back. The previous server incident, while never definitively linked to her, was now viewed through a lens of deep suspicion regarding her presence that night. She was terminated within the week, not just for slacking but for deliberate dishonesty and causing disruption. For me, the consequences were complex. There was no public victory lap, no moment where I declared my role. My meticulously crafted revenge was designed to appear as a technical anomaly amplified by Chloe's own actions. Mr. Henderson never suspected me. He was just relieved to have found the cause of the bizarre crashes and to have rid himself of a problematic employee. My career at the company remained stagnant, the damage too deep to easily repair. I finished out my time in the demoted role, a silent observer of the justice I had orchestrated. There was a grim satisfaction in seeing Chloe face consequences, seeing her carefully constructed facade crumble. She had caused chaos that cost me dearly, and her own habits nudged by my hand had ultimately brought her down, but the victory was bittersweet. The revenge hadn't magically restored my career or wiped away the jadedness. It had settled a score, yes, but the cost I paid lingered. The experience had changed me fundamentally. I was still meticulous, still resourceful, but the innocence was gone, replaced by a hardened understanding of how easily truth could be distorted and how vulnerability could be exploited. The title of Unwitting Casualty had defined a painful chapter, but orchestrating the reckoning had given me back a sense of agency, albeit in the shadows. I left the company a few months later, finding a position elsewhere in Columbus, a place where I could start fresh, carrying the lessons learned and the scars earned. The memory of the stale office air, the glow of the solitaire screen, and the cold satisfaction of watching a manipulator hoist by her own petard remained. Revenge, I learned, wasn't about restoring what was lost. It was about reclaiming a sense of power when everything else had been taken. It was a dark, necessary act that allowed me to finally close that chapter and move forward, forever changed. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.